You're listening to HR Leader, inspiring you to lead the workforce of tomorrow.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the HR Leader podcast. My name's Jerome Doraisamy. I'm coming to you today from Camaragal Land in Sydney, and I'm very pleased to be joined in the studio by a return guest. Graeme Cowan is a founding director of Are You OK? And he's also the author of a newly released book called Great Leaders Care, Developing Safe, Resilient and Successful Teams. Graeme, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Jerome. It's great to be with you.
Today we're going to be discussing all things good leadership, why it can be so challenging to be a good leader in the current climate, and why genuinely caring for your team is going to be a surefire way to ensure success, productivity, and good team collegiality. Graeme, before we get into all of that, for those of our listeners who perhaps didn't catch your last appearance on the show a couple of years back, would you mind giving us a brief overview of your career and the work that you do now?
Sure. I started off in sales and marketing, worked with groups like Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. Then I moved into recruitment and was involved with that for a while, then culture change, outplacement. And then I co-led a business for Carney, the management consulting group. And it was the time of the tech crash, which really blew up that market. And even though I'd had episodes of depression before, this was by far the worst. I was out of work for 5 years, never thought that I would come back again from that. I did eventually. And, it was my mother, when I was feeling very sorry for myself, looking me in the eye and saying, I believe you'll use this experience to help other people. And it did sow a seed. I didn't believe it was possible, but it did sow a seed. So I came back and was an author of 3 books in the Back from the Brink range. And through those books, I met Gavin Larkin, the founder of Are You OK? And that was in February 2009, and helped him to launch the very first one. And I was on the board for 13 years, but stepped down a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And for those who aren't familiar with Graeme's journey, and especially his book range Back from the Brink, I'd strongly recommend you go and check that out. He's got an extraordinary story and one that is very uplifting and inspiring. Graeme, I'm curious to know, since you are sort of a number of years removed from that period of ill health in your life, how you reflect on it now. Does it feel like a different life altogether, relative to where you are now, or do some of those, I guess, lessons and takeaways still really resonate for you?
It does feel like a different life. It's a long time ago now, although I still have setbacks. And I think what I've learned is to identify those setbacks early and take corrective action. That's been really, really helpful. At the time, I would have wished it never happened, but it did really force me to reevaluate my life, my priorities, my values, and that's led to a new life and a very good life, which I'm, very, very happy with.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Now, you have a new book out called Great Leaders Care. And as a starting point, I'm curious to know why it was important for you to put pen to paper here.
I've been, running workshops for leaders for about 10 years about helping them to build psychologically safe and engaged and successful teams. And in that process, you get the chance to reality test, your ideas, your concepts. But I just felt it was at a time where we really needed to focus on leaders and managers. There was recent research which came out from Wiley, which showed that 47%, almost 1 in 2 managers, are severely stressed each week. And so, the Great Leaders Care mindset is about embracing self-care, building our own resilience and wellbeing, crew care, building psychologically safe and supportive teams, and red zone care, being able to identify and support someone who's struggling.
Yeah, and I want to dive into those 3 different types of care that you've referred to there, but I'm curious to pick up on that statistic you just mentioned, being 47% feeling severely stressed, I think you said. Yeah. How are we defining severe stress for those workplace leaders?
It's self-reported, so they have the opportunity. It goes from, I think it's... the scale was a 5-point scale. I think the one below it was stressed and then severely stressed. So that was the top end of the scale in terms of how people perceived it. And I guess it was just how they felt on that day, and that's how it came up. But 1 in 2 really shows that there's a really severe problem out there, because managers determine 70% of the engagement and well-being of their team. So it's contagious. If managers aren't in a great place, the team isn't in a great place.
Yeah, and just further to that, a point about engagement and well-being as flow-on consequences. There are, I would imagine, a number of both macro and micro impacts that result if a manager is feeling severely stressed, and not just for the individuals that sit underneath that manager, but then probably also for the broader economy as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you look across the market, when you speak to leaders on the ground, what's your sense of how difficult it is to be a manager right now, in this sort of social, cultural, geopolitical, technological climate?
It's really tough, and mainly for 3 reasons. The first is AI, and that's just disrupting every workplace. People are wondering how safe their job is, and it's improving so quickly. So that's every workplace is experiencing that. The second thing is the political chaos in the Middle East, which is just generating so much uncertainty, and then finally cost of living. There are many, many people who've got large mortgages, have seen their repayments just grow dramatically. Fuel prices are going up. There's many, many stressors. So a manager has to be aware of all of those, because it's likely that some or many people in his team or her team are affected by that.
Absolutely. We're chatting with Graeme Cowan, and we'll be back with more right after this. And Graeme, in the face of all of those challenges that leaders are facing, what's your sense of how cognizant they are of those challenges? Are they appreciative of the fact that it is perhaps a more difficult time than ever before to be a workplace leader?
They may not be able to articulate it spontaneously, but when I mention that, everyone nods. All those things nod. So I think the general recognition when it's articulated. And one of the biggest, messages that I always like to stress, there's so much outside our control, and really there are so many benefits of focusing on what you can control. And I talk about a moodometer, for individuals, and 10's where the best we've ever felt, 1 is where the worst we've ever felt. And we always go up and down there. But I think one of the really encouraging piece of information is from Professor Sonia Lyubomirsky, who wrote a book called The How of Happiness. And she looked at over 400 peer-reviewed studies to look at what influences our mood. And it came down to 3 things. And number 1, this often surprises people, was genetics. 50% of our mood is determined by our genetics. People like me aren't as robust as others. But I think the really encouraging thing is the second biggest one is intentional actions, what we decide to do each day. And we all have control over that. We all can, do the things that boost our mood. And then the events actually only impact about 10%. So this is great news. And the other thing about a moodometer is it also applies to teams. We have teams in the green zone, amber zone, red zone, and the leader has a tremendous impact on that mood and how people feel in terms of their sense of connection, their sense of belonging, their sense of comfort being their authentic self.
So in the face of these broader challenges that we're talking about, and some of these things that, as you've just said, are outside of our control, what is the rational or reasonable response to all of this? Because it is all pretty stressful and overwhelming, the way we're talking about this. And, I'm a workplace leader, and I certainly resonate with a lot of the points that you're raising here. How can leaders like myself look to move forward? Are there certain questions that leaders need to be asking of themselves at this point in time?
I think one of the best things a leader can do is to be authentic and to not say everything's fantastic, say there are challenges. And, some really successful leaders who I've interviewed on my podcast, The Caring CEO, say that they wish they were vulnerable earlier. And when I asked them what exactly they meant by that, well, he said, for the first 10 years of my career, I pretended that I knew everyone. I was the one with divine wisdom. But I soon discovered after a period of time that if I pretend I've got all the answers, people shut up. And so actively soliciting ideas, encouraging people to present thoughts or things that could be considered is really, really helpful. And this is team psychological safety, where people feel safe, they feel they can be themselves, but it's also very, very fragile. And so, dismissing an idea too quickly or rolling your eyes, helps to really shatter that. And in this day and age, people like Google have found it's the number one predictor of their most innovative and successful teams.
Yeah.
And we all need that. We need that ideas. We need the best ideas and input from the team before deciding. And in a psychologically safe team, people contribute approximately equally. And so actually calling out introverts or people that may not be as comfortable talking is really essential. It doesn't mean it's a democracy, but people feel involved in the decision-making process, and that counts a lot. It's about really how are we going to get through this together.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the different ways that leaders can and should be caring, not just for themselves, but for their teams, both collectively and for their individual workers' idiosyncrasies. But just sort of zooming out, I'm curious to know if you think that leaders need to be thinking about new approaches rather than going back to, tried and tested methods from, years gone by. Are we at a point in time in the market, professionally, whereby the old ways of doing things are no longer applicable?
Well, I've got enough grey hair and experience to have seen workplaces for a very long period of time. And this change now is the fastest by far I've ever come across. So there are some unique elements about it. There is also, some of the other challenges we talked about. But one of the best things that a leader can do is to create a sense that we're in this together. And when I often present in keynote presentations and I reflect on, the great success of Are You OK and the incredible movement that's become, and talk about that being a really great team, I then throw it back to the audience and say, what about you? What's been a great team you've been part of? It could be where you are now, a previous role, when you worked at McDonald's or a sports team.
Yeah.
But what made it different? And picture the people that are in that team. What made it different? And I then have people vote anonymously on, a tool called Menti about choosing the three most significant factors. And in 95% of the cases, the top three chosen are we cared about each other, we had each other's back, and we encouraged each other.
Yeah.
They're all very, very human skills. Other options were a great strategy or complementary strengths. They all count. But as Google and many others have found, that psychological safety is the foundation, and that support and the encouragement to be involved in the future is the foundations for better teams.
So, and put more simply, a team that cares for itself and for each other is one that will thrive.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this isn't just, a throwaway line or something only Mother Teresa can practice. Gallup have now got engagement measures down to 12 questions, what they call the Q12. And there's one statement: my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. Now, this has been asked, 1 million times, 100 countries. And they've got iron solid proof that the more people that strongly agree with that, the higher the productivity, the higher the profit, the higher the customer service levels, and the longer people stay with the organisation. So this care is not a soft skill, it's a strong skill.
Yeah.
These technical skills can be replaced, with AI and everything else. But AI can't, notice when someone's not themselves. It can't involve them in building a compelling future and that sort of thing. So we really have to double down on things like empathy, care, support to have teams that are future ready.
And do we need a new definition for what it means to care in the workplace? Or will the definition differ depending on what kind of workplace it is?
One of the people I interviewed on my podcast was Bob Chapman. He was an American amazing American leader. He passed away, unfortunately, just about a month ago. But he grew a business from $20 million up to $3.6 billion. And in my podcast, he said that he used to think you showed you care by talking to people.
Yeah.
And he said what he discovered was it was listening with empathy. And that is how we truly show care, is to listen with empathy, let someone feel heard, and perhaps come up with some thoughts or some ideas that may address some issues or problems that they're raising.
Yeah. Graeme, I've just got a few more questions for you, which we'll get to on the other side of this. So, Graeme, let's talk about the 3 arms of care that you detail in your book. And of course, we want people to go and buy it, so we're not going to give away all the secrets. But at a high level, would you mind running us through those 3 arms? And we'll start with self-care.
Yes, self-care is about investing time to keep ourselves in a good place. And so there's 3 elements of that. There's vitality, which is our physical health, move well, rest well, eat well. There's intimacy, which is our emotional health. So that's having supportive relationships and encouraging relationships around us in both the workplace, but also in our personal life. And the 3rd element is prosperity. And this is about our career well-being, our contribution well-being. And often people, get it from work when they see how their work benefits other people, but they can also get it from, volunteering at a school, a sports team, or a charity sort of thing. So those 3 things are VIP, vitality, intimacy, prosperity. And, my message is you got to act like a VIP, not like a wanker, but invest time to top each of those 3 each day.
Yeah. And, I've sort of long held the view that, when it comes to self-care, you've got to make time rather than find time for it. You've got to be deliberate about it. But for workplace leaders, I think that's sometimes easier said than done. A lot of them will have young families, as I do, and then you're often working longer than 9 to 5, across the week. And being able to reasonably carve out time for self-care, such as going to the gym, reading a book, spending time with your spouse, it's not always that easy to do. So, I mean, how can leaders, strike the right balance or reconcile those competing priorities?
Well, I think one thing is to recognise that there is time. We spend a lot of time on our phones. People, the average person spends 7-9 hours on their phone. Not always for work, looking at social media or what have you. So it's working out when and where you can do it. Peter Goldwitzer, he's a professor at NYU, and his specialty is intention to action. And he says when you decide when and where you're going to do it, it increases the chance of it happening by 300%. Now, I don't dismiss it. It's a while back, but I had young kids as well, and I know how unpredictable that can be. But I think it's also about, working with your partner as well and working out when they can have dedicated time for their self-care and then time for yourself. So, I think it is a conversation. It is scheduling into the diary and also just being gentle and caring for yourself, self-compassion. If the baby's suddenly crying, you can't do it, well, that's life. You have to address what's more important. But I think if you do schedule it and think about where you're going to do this self-care practice, it does increase the chance it's going to happen.
Yeah. And the second one is crew care. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's 3 elements in that. It's caring about belonging. And so that's making sure there's a sense of belonging in teams. And there's a number of methods you can do, looking at catching up, socially, having fun together, going for coffee together, all that sort of things. But really recognising that we are much better when we feel we belong, as are our colleagues. The second element is leading with psychological safety. And as I described before, this is, creating an environment where people feel heard, where they feel they can make contribution, make suggestions, but also challenge ideas they don't feel comfortable with. And, for a manager, that really is the spirit of curiosity. When someone does something you don't quite get, well, just tell me a bit more about that. And then the third element, and this is so important in today's workplace, is growing together, encouraging each other, to do little experiments, to improve things in terms of how you serve your colleagues and also your customers and other stakeholders. They're the three components of good crew care.
Yeah. And the third one you have is red zone care. I've never heard that term before.
Well, it comes back to the moodometer, so, in the red zone, you're in the bottom third. And in there, you're often, depressed, anxious, angry. And I've been in that zone for a long time. It's not much fun. And so I surveyed over 4,000 people to find out what they found most helpful. And it came down to an acronym, I care. So I is how we identify someone who could be struggling. That's changes in mood, changes in reliability, changes in life circumstances, going through relationship difficulties. C is for compassion, and that's asking, are you okay? And truly listening with empathy so the person feels understood. Yeah. A is for access experts. So that could be to, see your GP. If they've got a EAP, to call the EAP. There's online tests to assess how serious it is with groups like Beyond Blue and the Black Dog. But it's getting to expert help and feeling heard and understood. And the earlier we can do that, the faster it turns around. As I said, I still struggle with setbacks, but I now have got my own ritual to handle that. And that ritual is, if I'm feeling really anxious, I'm waking up early, like getting back to sleep, it's, reaching out to my psychiatrist, calling a couple of mates, and your father is one of those, and letting them know how I'm going. And, that makes you feel a relief almost straight away. R is for revitalising work, and the science of recovery tells us that in the vast majority of situations, we're better off being connected with our colleagues than sitting at home by ourselves staring at the wall. And then final E is for exercise. Just a 30-minute brisk walk can improve our mood for up to 6 hours later.
Yeah. Well, thank you for running us through all of those practical steps. It was very comprehensive, but also quite clear in what needs to happen across those three different arms of care. Now, Graeme, looking ahead, when you when you look across the market, when you speak to professionals on the ground, what's your level of optimism that workplace leaders in different sectors, whether it be law, accounting, real estate, defence, mortgage broking, when you look at leaders across our market, how optimistic are you that Australian workplace leaders are going to heed some of these lessons and really put care at the forefront of their approach to daily operations?
I am optimistic, and I do believe that, there are practices leaders can make to be good for themselves and good for their team. But I'm not underestimating the challenge by any means. As I said, we've never had more disruption of my 40-odd years in the workplace, and but recognising it, I think, is very important, and being able to see the difference between busyness and effectiveness. We can be very, very busy, but we may not have time for reflection to think about, how we're going. And one thing I really encourage every person to think about, and this is a saying from Maya Angelou, the great American poet. She says, success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. And so I encourage people every weekend to consider those three questions and to rate themselves on those three questions. And if they don't like the answer, do something about it. Work out how you can rejig a bit in the week ahead to improve those scores.
Yeah. And for individual professionals listening to this episode, whether they be HR practitioners or / managers, or whether they're team leaders, say in a law firm, whether say they're a partner, how can they try to bring the business along for the ride here? Certainly, they could look to make changes in their own small team, which would be a great start. But how can they, convince their colleagues at that senior level, the C-suite, whomever else is a decision maker within the business, how can they also really champion some of these ideas so that they can be, organization-wide?
Yeah, I think it's curiosity, really, to go in, not to sell a new approach, but just to ask, if things aren't working out, what do they think that is? What do they think is the root cause of it? Harmful work stress has another term called psychosocial risk, and they've identified 14 root causes of that stress. So looking through that list and thinking, okay, what's making it hard for people? And then to have a focused approach, not to try and fix all 14, but to decide on one or two, talk it through, with other groups in the organisation and say, if we're going to do one thing differently, what would it be that would make a difference?
Yeah.
And so it's recognising the root cause of the issue and collectively deciding, okay, how are we going to address that cause and do something about it?
Yeah. And Graeme, for those who want to check out your book, Great Leaders Care, where can they pick up a copy?
It's at all good bookshops, which is fantastic. And currently, I'm not sure how long this will be, but it's at all bookshops in the airport. And, last week it sold, it was the second biggest selling business book, which I was incredibly proud of.
Yeah. Graeme Cowan, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thanks, Jerome. I really enjoyed it.
And thank you to the listener for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating and review on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, as it'll help other HR practitioners discover and enjoy this show. And if you've got ideas for other episodes we can run, please get in touch at editor@hrleader.com.au. You can also reach us on social media. See you again next time.